Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the Old World today. We're continuing our look at how you play the game of Warhammer The Old World, and today we're going to be investigating the shooting phase. Now Games Workshop says all of the phases of the turn, including the shooting phase, are split into 4 sub-phases, and that's the way it's structured in the rulebook. However, I think this is a little bit of a stretch by Games Workshop in order to package things nicely. Rather, I think once you've chosen a unit that you want to shoot with, it's better to think of there being 6 steps that need to be followed. What are these 6 steps? Well, once you've selected a unit, you need to declare its target, then you roll to hit, roll to wound. The targeted unit makes armor saves, casualties are then removed before break tests are applied. I'm going to go through each of these elements of the phase in turn. So how do we apply the various steps in the shooting phase? Well, let's start with an example here and have a look at the first of the sub-phases, which is choosing what target you want to shoot at. And in this case, we've got a unit of Halfling Outriders and may want to take a shot at a unit of Dwarf Heavy Infantry. Now, in this particular case, the Halfling Outriders have decided at the start of the game that they're going to be in open order rather than skirmish order. This means that they don't benefit from the 360-degree line of sight that skirmishers have. So we need to be confident that we can see the target, that it's in range, and when saying can we see it, it has to be in the front arc of the unit. So let's have a look at what this looks like in reality. Looking at the range, we can see that as we follow the track down, the halflings are just over 13 inches away from their intended target. Now these guys are armed with repeater handguns which have a range of 24 inches, so they're easily in range. But the question remains, can they see the target? So it's here that our handy arc visibility tool comes into play, which shows us the 45-degree angle coming out of the side of the unit. So all the models that we see just here have to be able to draw a line of sight in this arc to their intended target. And we can see from this view that everything in that unit does indeed have line of sight to the dwarves. This means that we have got a legal choice of shot, and the halflings can open fire at the dwarven heavy infantry. We can now move on to the other sub-phases and see if they can actually hit their intended target. The next thing we need to do is look at rolling to hit. So let's continue with the previous example that we just looked at with our halfling outriders having a shot. Fundamentally, in order to hit a target, you need to reach the magic number of 7. So this is your d6 dice roll plus your ballistic skill. Now this isn't how the rulebook describes it, but if you have a look at the figures, if you've got a ballistic skill of 2, for example, you need a 5+ on a d6 in order to hit before any modifiers are applied. For 3 it's 4+, 4 it's 3+, etc. Now a natural 1's always a failure, and if your shooting model has a ballistic skill of 6 or higher, then it does get a reroll. The reroll will be without modifiers applying and is a higher number. So ballistic skill 6 has a 6 up, 7 has a 5 up, 8 a 4 up, etc. in order to hit the target. But what are these modifiers of which I'm talking about? Well, fundamentally, there are 5 we need to really think about. Moving and shooting, firing at more than half range of the missile weapons capable distance, standing and shooting, so this going back to the movement video is when you're receiving in charge and opt to shoot at the charging unit. A target being behind partial cover, this means up to half of the unit being obscured from vision, and also targeting something beyond full cover, where more than half of the target is obscured from view. Now, with the exception of full cover, all of the to hit modifiers are a -1 to your dice roll, and they do stack up. So if you have moved and are shooting at long range, that would be a -2. So a unit with ballistic skill 3, instead of needing a 4+, would need a 6 on a d6 in order to hit the target. However, the list of to hit modifiers listed in the rulebook on page 138 is not the end of the story, and many weapons will have additional special rules which apply to them, which will further affect your ability to hit the target. So you need to bear this in mind when rolling to hit. So again, if we look at this example we discussed a moment ago, our Halfling Outriders have a weapon which is capable of firing multiple shots, and this rule means they are -1 to hit whenever they want to use that weapon. It's a further to hit modifier that's listed under that special rule. And being a cumbersome weapon, much like handguns or crossbows, this gun also has a rule where if it moves and shoots, it doesn't suffer the -1 penalty, but rather suffers a -2 penalty instead. Fortunately, the Halfling Outriders didn't move in the turn they opened fire, so do not suffer this penalty. Instead, they'll suffer a -1 penalty for firing at long range, and 1 extra additional pip of restriction because they're firing multiple shots. Each of these models has 3 shots, so all now roll to hit. Outriders have a pretty good ballistic skill of 4, so they would normally need a 3+ to hit the target, but taking the negative modifiers into account, they will instead hit on a 5+. It should be noted that in some occasions a unit may need more than a 6 in order to hit the target, and this is possible. So if you need a 7 to hit, you need to roll a natural 6 on your first roll, and then any 6s are effectively re-rolled, but this time you're looking for a new number. To get 7 you need a 4+, to get an 8 you need a 5+, and to get a 9 you need another natural 6. If you need a 10, the shot is deemed impossible, and no one is good enough to make that particular shot. We now go on to take our successful hits and to see if they do any damage to your opponent, or rather the unit that you've decided to shoot against. And what we need to do here is compare the shot strength along with the toughness of the target using the chart you see before you. And this is found on page 140 of the Big Blue rulebook, or Big Teal rulebook if you prefer. You'll see that if the strength of the weapon is the same as the toughness of the target, you will need a 4+ in order to hit the target, wound the target. 1 pip either way in difference will give a plus or -1 to that dice roll. So if your weapon is strength 4, shooting at a target with toughness 3, you'll only need a 3+ in order to cause a wound. Anything beyond that up to the limits of the strength versus toughness category is going to either be a 2+ or 6+ depending in which direction you're moving. By this I mean if your strength 4 weapon is shooting at something of toughness 6, then you will need a 6+ in order to do the wound. But if your strength 4 weapon is firing at something with toughness of 2, you'll only require a 2 on the d6. A natural 1 is always a failure. And what is this magic point of which your weapon is too weak to wound a character or unit that it's shooting at? That's if its strength is 6 or more points lower than the target's toughness. We now come on to the armor save step. So those shots that were successful in hitting and in wounding the target will now have to see if they have penetrated the armor of their would-be victim. And this roll is made by the person who owns the targeted unit rather than the people taking the shot. Now it's important to note within the armor save section of this phase that this is something that has changed quite a bit since Warhammer Fantasy Battles. It's also quite a different approach to that taken in other Games Workshop games such as Warhammer 40,000. So it's easy for mistakes to be made and easy for even veteran players to import knowledge from other gaming systems. So fundamentally, what happens? The first thing that needs to happen is the person taking the armor save needs to determine what the armor value of that unit actually is. This is calculated as follows. Light armor gives you a 6-up armor save, heavy armor a 5-up armor save, plate armor a 4+ armor save. If the unit has got shields and they are not using a double-handed weapon at that particular point in time, then they will get a +1 to their armor save. It's of note that if a unit's being shot at, it's almost certainly using any shields it's equipped with. This restriction will only really apply in melee if a unit's got double-handed weapons or halberds, for example, but it's worth bearing in mind for future reference. If a unit is mounted and that mount has barding, that will also give a +1 to the armor save. So let's say that our plucky halfling outriders are having a shot at a unit of dwarf infantry equipped with heavy armor and shields. This would give the infantry a 4-up save. So they would then roll to see each of those wounds to see if they could get a save value of 4-up on the d6. But, however, once again we get to the point where some weapons have special rules which can affect this. And there's 2 special rules that we need to think about. Some weapons have an armor piercing rating, typically -1 or -2. And what this does is gives a -1, for example, negative modifier to your opponent's armor save. So if a gun with a -1 AP shoots at something and wounds it, when that has a 4-up armor save, the armor save would be reduced to a 5-up. The other special rule to think about is armor bane. On a natural 6 to wound, this will trigger the special rule armor bane should the weapon have access to it. And this will give an additional amount of armor penetration to that hit. So a weapon with AP of -1 and an armor bane of 2, for example, on a 6 to wound would do a -3 modifier to the armor save. So that 4-up armor save we were just talking about on the dwarves is suddenly disappearing. Now it is possible that the unit being shot at has more than one save available to it. In addition to its armor, it may have a ward save, it might have a regeneration save. No matter how many saves a unit has, it can access all of them every single time unless a special rule steps in to prevent it. Flaming attacks preventing regeneration, a classic example. So if our unit of dwarves have their 4-up armor save from their equipment, but also happen to have a banner of some description which grants them a 6-up ward save, then they would be able to test on their armor to see if that protects them from the incoming shots, and any wounds that get through their armor saves would then be tested against the ward save. It should be noted that the order in which saves are attempted is armor save, then ward save, then regeneration save. We now get to the final 2 stages, or sub-phases of this particular phase. We remove any casualties from the targeted unit, and if a unit has taken more than 25% casualties, that's a quarter of the unit's strength at the start of that shooting phase, it must make a panic test, unless it is immune to psychology or has another special rule, which means it doesn't have to take the test. As you can see, special rules keep coming up again and again, and part of what makes the game quite complicated when first trying it out. Panic test is simply a leadership test, and is taken in the way as other leadership tests already described in previous videos. If a unit passes its panic test, then no further action is taken. However, if it fails the panic test, then one of 2 things will happen. If the unit has at least 50% of its starting model, so that's the size of the unit at the beginning of the game left, it will fall back in good order. And we'll be discussing that in a bit more detail when we talk about the melee phase. If the unit has less than half of its starting strength, and that unit will flee directly away from the enemy unit that did the shooting, and that is as described in our video on the movement phase. It should be noted that there is only requirement to take a single panic test per shooting phase. You don't have to take them multiple times if you're shot at by a lot of different units. We've covered how mundane weapons, your everyday standard bits of kit, operate in the shooting phase. But there are a couple of things we need to talk about outside of this. One is magic. So if you've got a wizard that's equipped, or rather has rolled up at the start of a game, a magic missile or a magical vortex spell, when selected to act in the shooting phase, this is the time that those spells can be attempted. And they're attempted in exactly the same way as we've discussed in the videos that have come previously. Now, each spell has its own special rules, so may well negate the need to hit, for example, having automatic hits, but simply follow the instructions on the spell. Combined with the discussion we've already had in the shooting phase, and you shouldn't get too far wrong. What's more unusual is war machines. Depending on the type of war machine you're using, it will operate in a different way. And the rules for these are covered in the rulebook from page 222 onwards. We'll touch on these briefly in turn, however, to give you an idea of how these operate. The first weapon to talk about is the bolt thrower. And this is basically a giant crossbow. So rolling to hit, rolling to wound, etc. all works the same as if it was a normal crossbow, in just the same way as we've just described. However, this is a one-shot weapon that, if it hits the target, could potentially hit every single rank in the unit it's shooting at, but it will only hit one model in each of those ranks. You'll need to test to wound on each rank separately, because the hit will lose 1 pip of strength for every rank it goes through. So for a strength 6 bolt thrower, it will hit the front rank at strength 6, a second rank would be at strength 5, a third rank at strength 4, etc. And any hits on the rear rank will count even if that rank is incomplete. It should be noted that some bolt throwers, called repeater bolt throwers, do have the ability to switch out firing a single shot that can go through multiple ranks to firing a barrage of multiple shots, which will only hit one model once, so won't continue to penetrate a unit. Let's turn our attention now to stone throwers. And this is another weapon which has seen change from the way it's fired in the old Warhammer Fantasy Battle days. The first thing you need to do is choose a target that's within range of the weapon, typically 12 to 60 inches. And you then place a small template, that's the 3-inch blast template, over the centre of the unit that you're shooting at. The model that lies under the hole in the middle of the template will hit automatically at the higher strength category, that's the number in brackets, and every other model that is completely covered by the template will be hit at the lower strength value. For any models which is partially covered by the template, you need to see if they're hit or not, and they'll be hit on a 4+ on a D6. But placing a template over a unit doesn't guarantee that you're going to hit it. Instead, you have to see if the shot scatters. To do this, you'll need to roll both an artillery dice and a scatter dice. So that's one of the dice that has all the little arrows on it and the hit, and the other dice which has the numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and misfire. Combined, these will tell you how far the shot has missed its intended target by. If a misfire shows on the artillery dice, you immediately need to make a roll on the stone thrower misfire table to see what exactly has gone wrong. It should be noted that some weapons have the bombardment special rule, and that includes stone throwers, so they can fire indirectly, so they can shoot at a unit they can't see, albeit it has to be in the arc of fire. The difference here is if you roll a hit, then you'll see there is a very small arrow on that icon. The shot will always scatter in the direction of that small arrow. The number of inches on the artillery dice, although you get to reduce it by your ballistic skill, so it doesn't scatter quite as far. Okay, let's talk cannon, and these fire completely differently again to stone throwers and bolt throwers. So unlike the other weapons where you're targeting a particular unit, in this point in time what you're actually doing is targeting a point on the ground. So you need to be able to see that point of the table. You then roll a single artillery dice, and the number that comes up is in inches, the number of extra distance that your shot has gone from the point in the ground you have selected. So if you roll a 4, the shot will go 4 inches beyond where you originally chose to put the ball. This is called the strike point. It should be noted that if at this point you've rolled a misfire on your artillery dice, nothing else happens, and you should roll immediately on the cannon misfire table to see what's gone wrong. Assuming the cannonball didn't result in a misfire, you now need to see how far that ball has bounced from the strike point, and you roll a second artillery dice. The ball will then travel in a straight line the number of inches indicated. However, if you roll a misfire at this point, the ball buries itself into the ground and does not bounce at all. For the purposes of play, anything that lies between your cannon and the impact point, or strike point rather, is deemed to have been missed. But once the ball has hit the ground and is then bouncing, anything in that line will be hit. This is limited, however, to 1 model per rank of a unit that is struck. This does mean that a cannonball can potentially work its way through 2 or more units. The only exceptions to this is if it hits a model with the troop type of monstrous creature or behemoth, in which case it's hit something so large and tough the ball will simply smack into it and stop, or if the cannonball hits impassable terrain or a high linear obstacle. Once you've determined what's been hit, then you roll to wound, etc. as normal. Getting up close to a cannon, however, is no guarantee of safety. They do have the option of firing grape shot. So this is where you roll an artillery dice, and that gives you a number of hits at strength for AP -1. Again, a misfire coming up means something has gone horribly wrong, but it does give them that close range opportunity to do real damage to a light unit that's come to wreck their day. The next war machine we need to talk about is the organ gun. These are multi-barreled weapons. So to determine the number of shots that you have, you get to roll 2 artillery dice to determine how many shots are fired. If either of those artillery dice come out as a misfire, you will then suffer an additional -1 to hit modifier. If both are misfires, then roll on the black powder misfire table. Otherwise, continue as normal. Turning now to the mortar, this effectively fires in exactly the same way as a stone thrower, the only exception being it uses the 5-inch blast template instead of the 3-inch blast template, and uses the black powder misfire table should anything go wrong. This leaves us with one final war machine we need to talk about, which is the fire thrower or flamethrower. These have a relatively short range of 12 inches. The way this operates is you take the flame template and place it next to the firing unit, so next to the fire thrower in its front arc, with the broad end of the template pointing towards the intended enemy target. You can then move that template up to the range towards the opposition, and this is measured from the narrow end of the template. Once the flame template is in its resting place, you roll an artillery dice. On a misfire, something's gone wrong, again using the black powder misfire table to see what's happened. Otherwise, if there is a number shown, you can then move the flame template that many inches directly away from the fire thrower, and this is where the column of fire shot from the weapon lands. Anything under the template follows the rules we've already discussed, so anything completely covered will be hit at the strength of the fire thrower automatically. Anything partially covered, we'll need to see if it is hit or gets out of the way, and the test for this is a 4+. So there we have it, the fundamentals of the shooting phase. Relatively important to some armies, pretty irrelevant to others, but one of the 4 key phases of the game. This leaves us with just one more video to look at when we're looking at the 4 phases of a turn, which will be the melee or combat phase. If you've enjoyed this video and others like it in this series, perhaps even the news following or the discussion of the strengths of various units available to the Empire, for example, do consider subscribing to the channel. As mentioned, this is the most effective way of supporting the channel, and it's really, really helpful. If you enjoyed the video, dropping a like also doesn't hurt. Once again, all it remains to say is thank you very much for listening. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.